back to the show. My guest tonight is a former WWE referee and can now be found as the co-host of the Smarks and Stripes podcast. Please welcome Kevin Keenan. What's up, guys? Good to see you. Thanks for being here. Have a seat. Have a seat. You and I go back a long way.
Quite a ways, man.
It's about 18 years.
2001.
2001? Yeah. It's crazy.
Time flies.
Before we get into what you're doing today, I want to kind of take everybody down. You have such a cool story about how you made it in the wrestling business, and I consider that you made it in the wrestling business. Let's talk first about how we met. So I'll tell you from my point of view. I got a phone call, 2001. I was 17 at the time. I get a phone call from I guess you were, how old were you? I guess
I'm thinking I was 16.
16 maybe at that point?
Just turned 16.
Or maybe I was 18 by this point. But yeah, so
I think you're right.
I was 18 at this point. I get a call. And it's like, hey, it's Kevin. I'm like, all right. Yeah. You're like, Mom told me to call you. I'm like, Mom, did someone kill you? You know, like, what are you talking about? So to explain this, at the Wild Samoan Training Center where I was training at the time, everybody called Afa Pops and called his wife Lynn Mom. Yep. And that is...
Still to this day.
Right, and that is who Kevin was referring to. Neither Afa nor Lynn had given me the heads up that someone was going to call. So our first interaction, I was so confused, had no idea. But really what happened was we lived about 10 minutes from each other, and you were about to start training at the Wild Samoan Training Center, and they had recommended that you reach out to me to carpool up there. And then we would drive up there, and I would put myself over by the entire time trying to, seem like a big deal, talking about all the wrestlers I've met and interacted with, and anytime Bill Apter had introduced me to somebody, and you were very polite about it. And then you would kind of introduce me to, because I don't know if you were a tape trader or just tape collector, but you
a little bit of both.
You knew a lot more independent wrestling that was going on, Japanese wrestling even, than I did, and so you would kind of introduce me to some of that.
It's a bit of a trade-off. I gave you a bit of an education, and you just name drop.
Yeah, absolutely. That was exactly what it was. That's still what I do.
Nice.
So then we were up there and we trained together at the Wild Samoan Training Center. And then you, if you want to tell anything from your...
No, that's by and large for me how I remember it. I remember my stepdad took me up there. We sat in, did the tryout, and Pops, oh, son, you're really good. And I was terrible. Right. But, we did the whole deal, and they had told me that somebody lived in my area that trains, and, I didn't drive yet. So maybe, here's his number, give him a call, and, you picked up the story right then and there. And that's pretty much how I remember it.
What was funny was I had actually hurt myself. I don't remember which of the many times I hurt myself this was, but so I'd taken a little bit of time off. And I was like, I don't remember what month this was, but I'm pretty sure I wasn't planning to go back for like 2 more months. And so part of me felt like this was almost also Afa's way of just being like, all right, he sat around on his ass long enough. We're gonna bring Josh back by forcing him to actually do something, to show up,
the new kid,
which was great because it got me back there. I was running my own wrestling promotion at a very young age, when it was the Teenage Wrestling Foundation. Later, it was just TWF. And at that point, from day one in 2002, in February 2002, you came to help. We rented a ring from Afa, and you came to help us out as a runner in the back. Anything you could do, which really is, that's you in this business. That's how you were and how you are, just wanting to be involved in every aspect of it. Eventually, that leads me to one of my favorite stories. Eventually, you had your first match with us, which was a tag team match with Devin Moore. You were Kevin Moore.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Colonial Elementary School.
Yes, Colonial Elementary School, and you brought the biggest crowd we ever had there because you went there, right? Or you went?
I did fourth and fifth grade there, and then 6th and 7th grade in the middle school there, and then 8th grade I came back to Philadelphia. So I was out of the district, but close enough. I'm a Roxburgh kid, for those who don't know and who are watching this from outside the area. Where that show ran was only about 2 miles from where I actually grew up. So it was pretty easy for people to make.
And it was great. And you brought a bunch of people there. Prior to that, because I guess you weren't 18 yet, so you couldn't wrestle.
Oh, that's right. We had to lie about my age.
Right. So but prior to that, you were just like.
Do you remember in the locker room people having to hide me from the commission?
Yes.
Like you were doing a pre-show.
I don't know if we put you in a locker or whatever we did, or down there the showers in the back area.
We did a pre-show meeting, and I remember Kevin Matthews and Danny DeMonto sitting on either side of me, and Justin Cage in front of me, hiding me, so that the commission wouldn't
ask what your age was.
remotely even ask who you are.
They would go around, like I remember at one point I was 19 and we had a guy, Big Lou, who was 17, but I looked like I was 14, and Lou at 17 looked like he was 30, had this giant beard and everything. And they like come by and they're like checking my ID, and I'm like, first of all, I'm the promoter, so obviously, and then they didn't even check. So
I believe I even went to Franklin Mills Mall and had a fake ID made. They were actually making back in the day. They were giving you fake IDs. You could walk up to the check cashing place.
Now there's a statute of limitations, right? We're not getting
anybody in trouble here.
Okay.
But they were giving you like whatever you put on the card. They picture, laminate the whole deal. So like I was ready to rock and roll. They couldn't tell me.
There you go. No, you were good. So what happened was prior to you making your in-ring debut, you wanted so badly to be a part of the show and to be in the ring, and you'd been training for a while at AFA's, and so we had this idea. We said, okay, we can do something. We're gonna have, as I mentioned, Big Lou. I'm gonna be in there cutting a promo. Big Lou's gonna be there, and you're gonna come up with a camera and start taking pictures. And Lou is going to get, ticked off that you're taking all these pictures, and he's going to bring you into the ring hard way. And for those who don't know, hard way would be hard way bump, not hard. You weren't, he wasn't going to bust you open hard way, but a hard way bump. You basically, you pull on the ropes, and the guy comes in from the apron, lands with his back on the mat.
I could do that at the time.
You couldn't.
Yes.
So you went over the top rope
and through the bottom,
under the middle. Over the bottom, your back hit the bottom, and then you went out of the ring on your head.
I was smart enough at that time to still sell it.
Yes, and then I believe you got up and he speared you outside.
Why did I get up?
Yeah, it would be so great if I were to have been able to dig up the footage of that.
I don't know how great that would have been.
Well, we're about to find out. If you can roll the footage right over there. There's slow motion right there. There it is. Yep.
Would you believe that kid went on to be on TV at some point?
I know, right? So let's get to that. So after that bump, you went on.
What year is that?
That was 2002.
Okay.
Yeah, that was summer of 2002. You had what a lot of people might not know, who are only familiar with seeing you on TV as a referee. You were a full-fledged professional wrestler, and you traveled the world, really. You at least outside of the country.
Only once, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We got outside. Yeah, we got outside once.
It counts. Tell us a little bit about that, and then that transition into being a referee, how that came about.
It's a bit of a long story. So, I mean, in 2002, I was obviously, let me think where I was here at this point. So I was out of AFA's at that point, I believe. And then I had met a little clique here in Philadelphia, to the Philadelphia indie fans. They'll remember Drew Blood. You mentioned Devin Moore.
Yep.
The New York contingent of Danny DeMonto, Kevin Matthews, whoever else was in there at that time, Justin Cage. And we were always together every single weekend. So we would, whatever show, I didn't have any credit at the time. So it was like, I'm counting on Drew and Devin and Danny and Kevin. So like they got me on the majority of my shows. By 2005, we're rocking and rolling now, and I'm back at AFA's doing WXW, and there's some other shows popping up here and there, but I was wrestling pretty frequently. I remember I had a really, really, really good match with Jay Lethal in early 2005.
Really?
Really good.
That's
like
awesome.
Probably the best match I ever had.
Hard to have a bad match with Jay Lethal, but that's awesome.
I'd love to find that tape. I mean, I still think by 2019 standards, like that match still holds up. Like Jay was in a very, very high position still, very young in his career at that point, but still he was doing the Ring of Honor thing and Jersey All-Pro and that type. I mean, he was really catching a name out there. And man, he gave me everything. It was just really, really good. He and I just talked about that not too long ago. But the transition into refereeing, so I'm wrestling, I'm doing the whole thing, and I know that I'm not going to make it as a wrestler. Yeah, it's not in the cards. I don't look like those guys. I didn't look like a wrestler. I didn't work out then. I clearly don't work out now. So like I had no shot of making it to the WWE as a wrestler. Right. Not that the WWE was on my radar at the time. You got to remember, in 2005, like there were only a select few people who were really getting name recognition, and those were the only people that were being paid attention to. Otherwise, this is still in the day of message boards and all the other stuff. If you weren't in the upper echelon, you were kind of looked at as a joke.
Right.
So a chance happened, this chance thing happened. I'm not sure if I've ever really told this story. I might have told it before on a podcast or something. I'm not really sure. But I had a very good family friend who worked for the WWE, still works for the WWE. He's one of the directors of NXT currently. He's in a better position now than he was when, way back when he got my foot in the door. But I remember, guys like Nick Burke, and of course you remember Scott Fowler.
Scott Fowler, yeah.
Bill Bain, all of those guys were doing extra work in Baltimore, Maryland in July of 2005. I had nothing to do, So I called up my friends and I said, hey, I got a couple guys that are working some extra work tonight, some dark matches. I'd like to come. I didn't even care about the show. I'm going to come down and see those guys.
Yeah.
I was like, any chance I can get a couple tickets? He goes, couple tickets, that's all you want? I said, well, yeah, what else is there? He goes, well, Earl Hebner got fired today, and they're looking for a referee. I said, really? He said, how quickly can you get to Baltimore? I said, see you in 2 hours. So I'm fresh out of high school, maybe a year or so, no money, broke as can be. My grandma, I was living with my grandma at the time. She, before you go out to the deck, she had this little fish bowl there that was literally, that looked like a fish. So I took that whole thing with me, took it to ShopRite, threw it in Coinstar, drained the whole thing. I had like $40. So off to Baltimore we go. Get down to Baltimore. I had the whole, I don't know if you probably remember, I had the whole long hair going. I think I'm a wrestler, it's cool. So we get down there and I get in there and, Marty brings me over to sits me in between Briscoe and Ted DiBiase. And they had to have been like, who is this kid? And why is he here? Like, some of the answers that I gave them on like different type of questions, they were really awesome, but they were clearly just doing it, to appease Marty.
Sure.
So Marty tells me, go over and sit in the stands. I'll come get you after rehearsal, the whole thing. Great, no problem. So I'm over there, I'm sitting in the stands, and lo and behold, here comes Vince McMahon. Not towards me, towards me. He's not coming to talk to me, but here he comes. Now I'm starting to panic because I want to know.
About to get thrown out,
if I'm
maybe,
Vince
or
McMahon,
what?
I want to know why this kid is sitting in my stands. But he's on the phone. So in all the arenas they have the hockey wall.
Yeah.
So he's leaning up against that. I'm 3 rows behind him, and I'm just Vince McMahon standing 15 feet in front of me. Like, this is wild. So at that time, John Laurinaitis was the head of talent relations.
Right.
So I'm sitting. So Vince walks away. I see this, and I didn't know who John was at the time. Like, we talked about some Japanese wrestling. I knew Hayabusa. I knew this guy. I knew that guy. Johnny Ace was never really anybody that came across my tape.
And even if also looking at him, if anyone's ever seen from like the Dynamic Dudes days
that
versus...
that was before my time, before I started watching wrestling.
But even then, he looks so drastically different without that long blonde mullet and all that stuff. So,
I didn't think to Google him because I didn't know what to expect walking in here, right? So here comes this guy all dressed in black. Now, mind you, three or four security guards already asked me who I am.
Right.
Like, I'm with Marty. Oh, okay, cool. I'm with this one. All right, cool. All right, cool. No. So this day, John just happened to be dressed in black. And I'm like, great. Here comes another security guard. 5th time's the charm. I'm getting tossed. He's got blonde hair. He's walking towards me, and he goes, Kevin? And I, yes, sir. I hear you're a friend, John Laurinaitis. I'm like, whoa. This is the dude that...
Because you know the name. That's the thing. Right? You know the name,
exactly
but you don't
who he
know.
Was.
Right.
Like, whoa, this is the dude that gives out contracts. Like, what's happening here? So he sits down. He goes, so tell me a little bit about yourself. So I go through the whole thing, this, that, and the third. And I don't even really know if he knew why he was talking to me, because he starts saying, I hear you're a wrestler. Well, yes, sir. Tell me what you do. Go through the whole thing, and he goes, here's my personal number. Get a little bit of a tan, get a little bit better shape, and I'll send you to Deep South for a tryout. I'm like, well, shit, if nothing else, I got a tryout. We're good to go here.
Yeah, right?
He gets up to walk away. He turns back around. He goes, you ever referee before? Yes, sir. Not really.
Right.
He goes, you any good? I'm my own worst critic, John. Great, you're in the dark match tonight. Corderas calls Jimmy Corderas. Get this kid's hair cut. Get him wired up, the whole deal. Put him in the dark match. Wow. Okay, so here we go.
Oh, they didn't even ask you, would you mind cutting your hair? It's just, we're going to cut your hair.
They did. And,
oh, did they really? Okay.
Well, sort of. So John says to me, get his hair cut, whatever. He might have asked me, you don't mind, right? And I'll never forget this, and I don't know why I said it, and I would never say it today. And I was like 18 or 19 years old. It just, the balls on me back then. I was like, well, how short? He's like, for an opportunity, right? I'm like, right. He's like, so here we go, cut the hair, boom, wired me up, Smackdown shirt, the whole thing. Next thing I know, I'm in the locker room with Lance Cade and Trevor Murdoch and Nunzio and Vito.
Okay.
Vito's just came in. No, I'm sorry, Murdoch just came in. The Cowboys haven't started on TV yet.
Right.
So we did the dark match, and God, it's so bad. On my end, not their end. But it's wild. It's 7:30 in the morning. I'm in my grandmom's house just trying to get tickets to a show. Mm-hmm. And 7:30 at night, I'm in the middle of the Baltimore Arena, 15,000 people. Little known fact, there was a squash match on Smackdown, which was Heidenreich and Animal versus, it ended up being Julio De Niro and Nick Burke, but Nick Burke was begging them to put me in it. And they were like, no, like we have plans for him. He's fine. So after the match, I come back, and John's like, great job.
So to cut you off for a second, when you say it was horrible,
by today's standards,
right? But from your end, I'm saying refereeing is something that it's almost like this day and age when every fan either knows or more likely thinks they know what it is to put on a wrestling match from a wrestling standpoint. They know about spots, calling this and calling that or whatever. I feel like being a referee is something that is still pretty, I don't know if it's so much that it's protected or just that people just don't really get what the referee's doing a lot. Did anyone kind of smart, I mean, obviously you'd been working for a while, but there's a difference between working between a referee for an indie show, even the biggest indie show, and a referee for a television taping. So did anyone smarten you up? Hey, here's some of the cues you're going to hear. Here's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, to an extent. Like at this time, SmackDown was still.
It was taped, right?
Still the brand split, and it was taped and all that type of stuff. So Jimmy Corderas was there, and he was great. He was my go-to right from the beginning. Brian Hebner was awesome. Brian was kind of like, I'm sure we'll get into it in a little bit, but like my first road trip, not too long after this tryout, which was there was like an extended tryout. Brian was like my chaperone. The office told him like, hey, kind of keep an eye on him type deal. But yeah, I always had those guys to fall back on.
Okay. No, continue.
Where'd I go?
So you came back and they said you did a good job.
So John was like, great job. And I was like, really? Like, I know nothing to compare it to. But before I left Philadelphia, I scoped out where they were for like the next 6 weeks.
Sure.
And they were all drives. Nothing that the company would ever have to fly me for, or not that they would at that time, but it's just like, how many shows can I make? How can I stretch this out and make sure these people know who I am? They were all drives like the next 6 weeks. So John said, hey, write down your information. I said, well, can I come next week? Like, I didn't want it to end.
Right.
He's like, where are we? I said, Cleveland and Rochester. He's like, yeah, sure. Come, I'll put you in the dark match and pay you $250. I'm like, great. So I get to Rochester.
Get to pay your grandmother back very quickly.
Yeah, no kidding. So we get to Rochester, and this is around the time they're starting the ECW thing. One Night Stand had just happened, and now they're still doing the crossover, kind of. So I get to Rochester, and Johnny asked me, again, dark matches both nights. The Cleveland dark match actually was Matt Capitelli and The Miz. They were trying these guys out to bring them up to the main roster versus the Highlanders. This was the Highlanders tryout, whether they were going to hire them or not. Clearly, they hired them. So we get to Rochester, same dark match, same thing. And Johnny asked me if I have a passport. And I'm like, passport? Wow, like, what's going on here? I'm like, they sending me to Europe? Like, so like, there was Canadian house shows coming up in a month. So John says to me, I want you at all the TVs leading up to the that Canadian road trip, and we'll talk after that. So it was like, I started in Baltimore. It was like Cleveland, Rochester, I think Mohegan Sun and Bridgeport, and then like 2 other ones, and then that loop of house shows. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget, this is how long ago it was, I'm sitting in the library with Ricky Reyes because we had to still
Once upon a time, we had these things called libraries.
No
kidding.
Yeah. But you had to go there to get on the internet. Like you couldn't, there was no iPhones or anything, right? Yep. So I'll never forget, the phone rings, and this is the night before I'm leaving, and Howard Finkel is on the other end. And I remember him giving me my travel as if he was calling a match. Like, you can ask Luke Gallows this, like it happened to him too.
Well, he does a fantastic impersonation of Howard Finkel.
Yeah, he does. But I remember this happening to him as well, because I'll never, Kevin, how you doing? This is Howard Finkel. And I'm like, oh my God. Are you ready to go to Cleveland or whatever? And I'm like, does he do this with everybody? Because I remember just telling Gallows, I'm like, that happened with me too. He's like, wasn't it awesome? Like, yeah. So anyway, so we get out there. The first night was London, Ontario. The next night was Peterborough. I forget where we were, but we ended up in Toronto in the car of myself, Simon Dean, Orlando Jordan, who was United States champion at the time, and Johnny Jeter, who ended up being Johnny in the Spirit Squad. So I remember doing Bobby Lashley and Johnny Jeter in the dark match that night, fly back to Philadelphia the next morning. Oh, by this time, by the way, so I'm showing up week after week, and I just remember Mark Henry turning to me one time going, yo, man, do you work here? And I'm like, dude, I have no idea. I don't know. But turns out I didn't work there. Right. Because I get back to Philadelphia, and I'm like, oh, I never talked to John last night. So I called John, and hey, do you need me at Penn State this week? Because they were at Penn State. And I remember he didn't give me a deadline or a cutoff and say, this is where, he just said, we'll talk after the Canadian loop. Sure. So I called, he said, no, we're good for now. We're going to bring up the referee from Ohio Valley Wrestling. And he's like, but definitely stay in touch with me. We want to do work in the future. Mm-hmm. And so that's where it ended for that extended tryout. I went back to wrestling, and then they brought ECW back as a brand.
And then they needed more referees.
And then I got a call probably, so when were they doing this? So they probably started in July, so I probably got a call in mid-June. Hey, John wants to see you again. Come on out to Pittsburgh. So I came out to Pittsburgh. I did a dark match, Damager versus Chris Cage. Mm-hmm. Don't know why I remember these matches. Then I get to Wheeling, West Virginia the next night, and Sabu had his referee. I'm sure you remember Pee Wee Moore from ECW fame. He was there doing a match. He did the match that I would have done. I'm sure just as a favor to Sabu. They didn't hire him. It was very weird that week because they added a third show. They added a Wednesday night show, and they never do that. And something told me that week to bring an extra change of clothes. So I talked to John on Tuesday in Wheeling. He says, call me Friday on Friday. I want to talk to you about a couple things. I look at Marty. I'm like, what do you think? He's like, he doesn't just take calls with people who he doesn't want to talk to, right? I'm like, I guess. So I remember asking John again, like, hey, can I come tomorrow night? And he was like, you want to come to Dayton? He's like, yeah, come to Dayton. See you tomorrow. I'm like, great. So I get there. I'm out there, just doing whatever, afternoon workouts, the whole deal. Next thing I know, they're pulling Chris Kay, who was the referee at the time, one of the referees at the time. They're pulling him out of his scheduled match and putting me in. And this was the show where it was WWE versus ECW. Okay. So they, and they didn't tell me that I was on until about Carly and Shelton were going to the ring, and we were up next. Oh, wow. So they yank him out. So I'm running, earpiece. By this time, they had molded me my own earpiece, which told me that I was like, they don't just do that for anybody.
That has to be a good sign, right?
So I have that, and I'm tying my shoes and the whole thing. And if I was any heavier than I was, I would have trucked Tommy Dreamer in the hallway. Boom. And he's head of developmental at this time still. He's getting ready to finish up I would end up being his last hire. He's going to go back to ECW full time. Mm-hmm. So I almost trucked him in the hallway, and he says to me, "Oh yeah, Kevin. By the way, we're going to hire you. I need all of your information. Congratulations." And I'm like, "Great, gotta go."
That is his excited voice.
I know. Tell me about it. Right?
Tommy's. Yeah.
So little nugget here. I had grown facial hair. Like I had a whole chin strap going on.
Can't have that, right?
Well, the reason I didn't get hired the previous time was a directive directly from Vince that I looked like I was 12.
Oh, so you grew the facial hair to
try
not
to
look like you're
older.
12.
So I'm like, I'm getting hired. Like so I grew it to try to look, older. Went, did the match. Coincidentally enough, the match was with Matt Hardy. Was the match I got hired off of. I'm sure we'll get into our history with him in a little bit. But I come into the back, and I'll never forget this as long as I live. John said, "Congratulations. Have you talked to Tommy?" I said, I did right before I went out. He said, "Welcome to the company. Congratulations. Shave your face." Just like, great.
That's fantastic. After you were hired, did you go right to OVW or you went? Or
No,
did you
I was on the main roster first.
Main roster first. Isn't that amazing? Like, main roster, then we'll send you to developmental, right?
I was on ECW right from the outset. I don't know this to be true, but it's what I heard. So I would have stayed on the main roster if it wasn't for certain people's mistakes. John Cone and I both would have stayed on the main roster had it not been for certain people's mistakes.
When you say main roster, are you talking Raw, SmackDown, or are you counting
Raw, SmackDown, ECW?
Okay.
Yeah, that's the main roster. You're on worldwide television.
Sure.
So I remember there was a match between Ric Flair and The Big Show, and just everything went to hell. Like, it was live television. Vince threw a fit. He had no confidence in his referees at the time. Like, we were all scared we were going to get fired and the whole thing. And the way to rectify the situation was by sending myself and John Cone to developmental. And they couldn't send the referee that was already up there back to developmental because he'd already put his time in, is what I was told. Don't know that to be fact, but I can also see that being the case.
Sure.
So they want to send me to Deep South. And again, the balls of me back then, I asked John, "Can I go to OVW?" "You don't want to go Deep South?" I said, "I'd rather go to OVW if possible." "All right, see you in Kentucky." Like, it was just that simple.
Wow.
And it was the best move I ever made.
So OVW, that is where you and I reconnect again. And one of the cool things about our friendship over the years is in the very beginning, like you said, you didn't have a license. So it was, I was called to be the guy to drive you to training. And even Afa had me go in to show you bumps and stuff like that. All these years later, it's about 6 years later, I'm toiling around with my TWF and indie stuff or whatever. And I get a message from you. It's probably MySpace or something. I don't know what,
Yeah, MySpace was all the rage back then.
Yeah, but I get a message that was basically, in not so many words, stop playing around there, come to OVW. And you were saying, like, you can come in there and my big thing was if I went to OVW, I wanted to go to the beginner class because I felt if I'm coming here, I'm coming here to learn. Joey. So that was one of the things. Joey Matthews or Joey Mercury that,
What a genius.
Yeah, and so you were just like, I was like, yeah, I would want to do beginner because I want to break any bad habits. If I'm there to learn the WWE style, I want to learn 100%.
Break the bad habits.
And you said you're like, one of my friends down here, Joey Matthews, he's doing this. So I said, awesome, that's great. I went down there. My first day coming in, I was so sick. I had I don't know if I had the flu or whatever it was. I was so sick. My first day coming in, I walk in the door to the Davis Arena, and you're in the ring. And I come in, and you're like, what are you waiting for? Take a bump. And it was cool because it had flipped now where I'm coming in, and, not that I took you under my wing at the other thing, but I gave you your first match with my promotion. I drove you to the thing. And now you completely were taking me under your wing, which was really, really cool. And you come in, you're like, come on in. What are you doing? Come into the ring. Let's go in the ring. You're like, take a bump. You're like, have you bumped in the ring yet? I'm like, no, it's my first time in here. Like, take a bump. And I'm thinking to myself, well, this is the WWE ring. And I'm like, I'm about to. No, it was.
No.
No, the one that they had down there. And I'll tell you how I know that it was.
Not the TV ring. The one we had on the truck was.
Okay.
The house show ring was a WWE ring. The one in TV in the Davis Arena, I don't believe was a a WWE ring.
The reason I think that it was,
Maybe I'm wrong,
was because when the WWE left, that ring left immediately and a new ring came.
Oh, interesting.
That's the only reason why. But I will tell you this, it had WWE turnbuckle pads and ropes on it.
It certainly
so that was
didn't
enough.
feel like a WWE ring.
That's my point. I went in and thought, this is going to be the greatest bump of my life. Goodbye indie rings. I'm bumping in a WWE ring. Oh my God, did that thing hurt. And I jumped as high as I possibly could, because also, I'm like, Joey's watching me, while Joey's like, he couldn't care less what I was doing. But I'm, I take that bump. It hurt so bad. I tried to no-sell it as best as I could. I'm like completely wind knocked out of me. But yeah, then we went there, and I remember after the first day, and we did so many squats and so many push-ups and sit-ups and all this stuff, and Joey ran us like crazy. And at the end, I remember you told me, you're like, yeah, he was impressed. And I don't know if you were being nice or if he said it to you, but that was like, I was like, okay, I feel good about this. And so tell me a little bit, before we get back to our relationship, what was it like for you in OVW when you got there and working with, now that you'd been up on the main roster, you're coming down to people who, a lot of them, their goal is to one day hopefully get even a tryout on the main roster at a tryout, at a house show. And you're coming down there. What was that relationship like with people down there?
Oh, it was fine. Everyone was really welcoming. I just went over this with Cody Rhodes last week. The first person that I met when I walked in the door was Cody Rhodes.
Yeah.
And he said it, and you can go back and listen to it on the Smarks and Strips podcast. I told him I remember walking in the door. He was the first person I met. But that was our college.
It really was. It really was.
I didn't go to college. That was my college. Everyone was awesome right from Jump Street. Cody tells the story. I remember Keenan because of the way he talked. He had a very Philly accent, and he's just very curt and brash, and he didn't rock up right away with the crew the right way, but with my crew, he rocked up with just fine, because we were all like that.
Right.
But if that's the case, everyone was great. Everyone was welcoming. Him especially. He was the one that took me around, made sure everyone knew who I was, where I had to be, took me out to lunch, the whole deal. Everyone was great. It wasn't like, here's a main roster guy coming into, to try to take any of our spots. And of course, you remember there's some referees there that were just there every week that had been there since the inception of OVW, that had nothing to do with the WWE, but they were still working.
Danny's guys,
I was the only contracted referee there for a good amount of time. But no, the OVW was great. And, everyone from the beginning in OVW, everyone was awesome. It was just, again, it was an education. It was college. So, it took me, and I say this all the time. We had Al on the podcast too. Mm-hmm. I thought I knew everything. I thought I knew everything about wrestling when I got to OVW, and I'd already been on the main roster, and I'd already been around on the Indies. And I thought I knew it all. It took me 5 seconds of being in OVW to realize I didn't know anything.
Well, I mean, and you and I being there at the same time with Al Snow, I've said many times before, some people, don't care for his style or whatever. I love Al. He is, in my opinion,
it's not a style though. It's an ideology.
Right.
But
I believe he's one of the smartest people to ever be in this business. One of the absolute best trainers, hands down. You're gonna
get no argument from me. I really truly learned how to work, how to actually work when I got there. Mm-hmm. I understood just as much wrestling as I did refereeing, learning from Al. The business of what we're doing, the gimmick of the match. What did we do last week that got us here? What are we doing this week that's going to take us to next week? Where are we going and why are we doing it? Mm-hmm. The who, what, where, when, how, why. With the characters involved and the referee and this, that, and the third. I didn't know any of that before I stepped into OVW. I was a better performer for training under Al Snow.
Yep. One of the things that you did at that same time, two lads from across the pond came over, were signed.
A couple of them.
Yeah, well, two specifically. Stu Sanders at the time, Stu
Wade
Bennett,
Barrett, yes.
Wade Barrett. That man has so many names.
I know, right?
and Drew McIntyre was there. And neither of them could drive because they didn't have a license in the United States.
I was on Drew and Stu duty.
So you were on that, and you took them around. One of the things, like you talked about what Cody did for you when you came in, that's kind of what you did for me. I would drive with you to the shows, to the house shows that we would do, and you took me around, introduced me to people. One of the things that I always really appreciated was you introduced me as, your friend. Not just someone you know. So you basically were putting your stamp of approval on me and also putting your reputation on the line for me. Yeah. Which, if anyone who knows anything about this business, I mean, someone screws up and that's your guy, that's on you. You know what I mean? Just as much as it's on me.
Very true.
So I always really appreciated that. When you got the call, and we'll jump back to that in a second, when you got the call to go to Tampa, you came to me and said, hey, do you think, I'm leaving, do you think you could drive Stu and Drew to all the shows? And I jumped at that because I'm like, that means I have a reason to be at these shows. I don't just have to beg to go there. And that was the start of my friendship with them, which I'm still, friendly with them to this day. That was the best experiences I had. I would go to those shows, I'd help set up the ring, and then I would sit next to Al Snow the whole night. And just whether he would talk to me or he was talking to someone else, I soaked up as much as I possibly could from him, because he talked through every single match about everything. And I learned so much just listening to him.
You had the best seat in the house.
Absolutely, absolutely. Especially when he would take pictures of things that were going on, and then he'd be like, hey, look at your phone. And it would be like a message was sent with a picture of something, which I'm not going to get him in trouble, but we had good times. So tell us a little bit about that call to go to Tampa.
Tampa was actually my call.
Really?
Yeah, it was my call. I don't know why I did it. I wasn't tired of Louisville by any means, and I always said that had I been brought back up to the main roster, I would have stayed in Louisville. I don't remember exactly what prompted me to ask to go to Florida, but I remember emailing the office asking, can I know it's brand new down there. You guys are setting up and the whole thing. Your feet are somewhat on the ground. Can I go? And I remember they were like, yeah. I mean, is that what you want to do? I was like, yeah.
Did you see the writing on the wall? Because a week before I got to OVW,
was that the Hunter
Triple
and Shawn
H
visit?
And Shawn Michaels came down. So a funny thing, I was at the Arnold Classic in March. It was right before WWE left. And I am in the back, going by the back door, and who walks in by himself? Triple H. And I go over, introduce myself, and he was way more polite, gave me more time than he probably should have. But
he's pretty awesome.
And I'm saying to him, I'm like, yeah, I'm down there. At this point, I'm all, I'm Mr. Wrestling. I'm wearing my Affliction shirt. I'm, putting my best foot forward. 2008 pro wrestler. And I'm like, yeah, I'm down in OVW. I'm training. I'm wrestling down there. He's like, oh, it's the place to be. And you talk about like being ballsy. I was like, well, it was. And he's like, yeah, I guess so. And that was it. I was like, well, good to talk to you, whatever. Because they had just announced, I think that weekend was their last show in Kentucky. So
was it March?
It was March. It was definitely March.
I came back for the last show, which I caught a bunch of shit for from the office. I remember.
Did you really?
Yeah.
No, it was March because I stayed till April and then I left. But so I remember that.
I don't know.
Did you see the writing on the wall there?
Maybe, man, my memory's so bad as far as stuff like that. It's possible. I had to have had a reason as to want to get out of there. I was very job scared back then, so it's like, that might be the case. Very easily could be the case, but I'm not totally sure. But I do remember they were very responsive. They're like, yeah, if you want to go, like that's fine. And I'm like, cool. So I mean, I'm moving to Florida, which was great. But yeah, it could have been.
When I was leaving OVW, when WWE was leaving OVW, and I remember they came down and they said, they said to the message to everybody who wasn't under contract, which was myself, if you're not 6 feet tall, or if you're not over 6 feet tall or Matt Sydal, we're not hiring. And obviously, different landscape today.
Yeah, right.
But I was like, okay, well, what am I doing here?
Right.
And I remember both, another thing I really appreciate, and I now have the platform to be able to put you over in front of people, both you and Stu and Wade Barrett, both of you offered me to come stay with you in Tampa. And you said, you're like, hey, look, I've only got like a couch or something like that. You're like, but it's yours if you want to come down here. And you're like, yeah, you know, I'll try and get you in. You didn't have TV yet. There was no TV.
We didn't have TV,
right,
and there was no other classes. It was strictly a contract thing.
Right. So you're like, well, maybe, I remember you saying like, you know, maybe you can come like hang around some of the things. Who knows? Maybe Steve Kern will take a liking to you, and you can come in and like bump once or twice.
He does. Steve took a liking to a couple different people.
Yeah, and I think at that point,
stuff like that did happen.
Yeah, and I always really appreciated that. I chose to come back to Philly because I think at that point I was a little burnt out, and I was a little just like, it felt like things were moving and going forward in OVW. Then they left, and it was like the idea of like, I was working the OVW house shows, I was doing the DCW TV, occasionally doing the OVW TV. So I was working maybe 4 or 5 nights a week. Mm-hmm. So the idea of like, okay, well, I'll come down and maybe I'll get a little FaceTime. At that point, I decided not to, and I guess it all worked out, you know, the way it was supposed to, but I always really appreciated that. So you're down there, so jumping forward, you're up on the ECW, you're on ECW. Did you ever go back up to the main roster?
Oh yeah, I was back and forth a bunch of times.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were up there.
If there was ever a referee off or anything like that, they would throw me on the house show loop. And then do dark matches and Sunday Night Heat and stuff like that. There was a bunch of those.
So what led to your release from WWE?
Nothing crazy. It's not a crazy story or anything. If you remember back in 2009, the housing market just went right through the ground, and the economy just hit rock bottom, and we were in a recession and anything like that. And remember, all companies were cutting at that time.
Absolutely.
And I remember seeing, I don't know if it was CNN, Fox News, or something like that, and I want to say Linda McMahon was on the show. And they said, the WWE's looking to cut $100 million company-wide. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, well, we all know what that means, right? But I didn't understand it at the point because they were still making money hand over fist.
Right.
And when you have hard times, man, like what's the first thing you do to try to get away from those hard times? You go to entertainment. So the WWE was still doing very, very well. But I also, I understand business, so I get it. So at that point, I was one of 120, I think, let go in one day. Referees, wrestlers, WWE.com, international.
Yeah,
I mean,
just
you
people in
name
the office,
it, company-wide. And, Jim Corderas was let go the same day I was. I think Mike Posey was let go the same day I was. Like, there was Tim White was let go the same day I was.
Yeah.
There were some significant.
And that's the unfortunate. If you look at like Tim White being let go, it's tough to have an argument with a guy who's been there as long, as tenured as he was.
At that point, I was 23, maybe.
So
something like that. But what they told me at the time was, you're so young, we can have you when we want you. So
what is your release by the WWE? What is your first mindset? Are you thinking, maybe I'll get back into wrestling? Hey, now I'm a WWE ref. Maybe I'll get bookings reffing.
My actual first thought was, and this was so stupid. My first thought was, I'm gonna go back to wrestling. I'm gonna get out. I was in the WWE. I'm gonna get a ton of bookings. You kidding me? And then that idea just flew by the wayside. Ricky Reyes was in Puerto Rico at the time. He told me I can come there. Matt Sydal was one of the first people that called me, and he wanted to get me in a Ring of Honor, which he eventually did with Adam Pearce, who I love. He gave me a tryout. Nothing ever came out of that. But I was just going around, and like the first person to give me some real regular work after WWE was Mike O'Brien in Northeast Wrestling.
Okay.
And he kept me really, really busy. And then I would do all his shows. And then all you really needed was 1 or 2 places that ran consistently. Right. So if like Mike was running twice a month, maybe sometimes 3 times a month, big shows too. And then, you find like a CZW, or I don't even know who was running at that time, but let's just use CZW as the example, that runs, every Saturday, throughout the year, 12 Saturdays a year.
So you're working.
And then you just fill in the holes with other things too. And so it really, really wasn't hard to find work at all.
So you're doing that. One of the, I know we're jumping way ahead here, but you made a return to television.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier Matt Hardy, and then we'd talk about your relationship with the Hardys. Final Deletion for Impact Wrestling. That was, anyone who follows that, they're familiar with the broken Matt Hardy gimmick and all of that. And he had that whole thing at the Hardy compound. And I remember I didn't, you and I, we've stayed in touch over the years and stuff, but I didn't know you were doing that.
Nobody did.
And I'm sitting there watching, and a car pulls up, and there's Kevin Keenan. And I'm like, oh my God. I was like blown away. I'm like, wait a minute, what is happening here?
It's so funny. I remember, I believe TNA released some of these on YouTube or whatever. Maybe it was just something internal, so sorry if I'm getting anybody in trouble. But I forget if it was Jeremy Borash who sent it to me, or if it was like Robbie E. or somebody sent it. Somebody sent me. They were doing.
Well, neither of them are there anymore anyway.
But
so
they were doing reaction shots to like the Final Deletion of so like they did one with EC3 and they did one with Spud and they did one with Magnus, and the biggest pop of the whole thing was me getting out of the car. Like EC3 like threw his popcorn up, like Spud like jumped up and down. Like people were just like, the boys were entertained by it, which is if the boys are entertained by it just solely by me rolling up in a car, then they're really in for a wild ride.
I just remember you said something like, what the, like something like that. And I'm just like, this is amazing. And like, Kevin's getting some lines in there too and doing that. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came to be and the experience of doing the Final Deletion?
We did do Total Nonstop Deletion later in the year, but Final Deletion was the beginning. I was just thinking about this the other day because I figured this would come up and how this all started. So I remember Matt coming in town for an appearance with Delaware Blue Rocks.
Okay. And
he was doing a signing, and I hit him up. Hey man, you want to grab dinner? Yeah, cool. Come down to the game. We'll grab dinner. The whole deal. So I go down to see him. Wine wrapped around the stadium. He's doing the deal. Finally, we're done. We go to eat. And his phone rings when we're pulling out of the driveway, out of the parking lot. And it's Jeff, and they're talking about this thing, and I'm hearing Matt talk about fire and the big cross, and we're going to do this, and I'm going to ride on a four-wheeler and shoot you with fireworks. And I'm just thinking, dude, these guys live in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, right?
Like what are they doing? Just like are they entertaining themselves? Like what's the deal here? So he's telling me, so he gets off the phone and he's like, I got to tell you about this deal, but you got to keep it, on the DL. And he's laying out the Final Deletion for me, and that's everything I heard, the whole thing. But it was his wife's idea, it was Rebby's idea to put me in to the Final Deletion.
Okay.
So Matt calls me up, hey man, you want to do this deal? Like, remember that deal I was telling you about a couple weeks ago? Yeah. You want to come down and do it? And I'm like, absolutely. Now, none of us knew going in what this actually was going to end up being. Right. Like, we had no idea.
It was huge for anyone who hasn't seen it, because there, believe it or not, are a lot of people who haven't seen it. Go check it out. It's really, I mean, if you're looking for catch can wrestling, I'd suggest you look somewhere else. Yeah. But no, it was fantastic.
I forget what I was going to say, but.
I cut you off. That's what I do here. I just cut people off and make them lose their train
We
of
had
thought.
no idea like what this was actually going to be. We were just shooting this thing. So I remember rolling up, and there's this ring in the middle of the woods on Jeff's property, and it took a while to shoot. I remember I had a show in Maryland the night before, shot right down to North Carolina. And I got there as they were shooting the very first scene, the Maxwell's birthday party and the xylophone and all that stuff. So it was cool to watch. And then I got changed and we started doing the whole thing. Obviously, I had to wait for it to get dark. The car scene, and I just improv. What is this? They didn't tell me to say anything. I didn't ask to say anything. It just happened to work. It fit great.
Do it, man.
And then here we are. Are you a licensed official? I am.
And you became the licensed official. That was like people knew who you were from that.
For a better part of a year after that, like I was Matt's personal Bill Alfonso.
Yeah.
Like wherever Matt ended up, for the most part, like no one was flying me anywhere to do anything, but like if I could do a show that he was on, he'd rather had me there than not, and that and that happened a lot. That happened with Tommy Dreamer's House of Hardcore, MCW. Like we were kind of all over the place doing, and it was getting to the point where like if I was doing a run-in on a Matt match, fans knew. These were fans that watched the Final Deletion, so like they knew that I was coming to get involved on behalf of Matt. It was pretty cool for a pretty good.
How did your relationship with Matt come to be?
You know, I thought about this as well. I don't know. I had that match with him. Of course, that got me hired. I didn't have the match with him, but I worked the match of his that got me hired. He was always very friendly. He was great, but he would come to developmental every now and again. And I'd see him, and he would always ask how I was doing. You know, what are they telling you? What are you hearing? Then when I got to the main roster, for whatever reason, I don't know why, he just always looked out for me, made sure I was cool, navigated the shark waters that were the main roster of the WWE.
So he just liked you, and you guys just hit it off.
For whatever reason, we just hit it off.
Nice.
And then he gets let go, and then I remember Mike O'Brien needing a main event for Mid-Hudson Civic Center. He had just gotten let go, and MVP had gotten let go not too long after that. So I put that main event together, Matt versus MVP. Yeah. And then that's Matt where I started to see him a whole lot more, and like our relationship really blossomed after that. But yeah, for whatever reason, he took a liking to me back in our time in WWE.
So when did refereeing kind of wrap up at that as a consistent thing that you were doing? When did you say, you know what, like this has been fun, I have to come back to the real world?
Yeah.
You know, what?
We're going on a better part of 3 years now.
Okay.
It got to a point where I was doing WrestlePro for Pat Buck, and that was kind of like my home federation, my home company. I mean, I was hustling. Like, I was working every weekend. I would be pissed if I wasn't doing 75 shows a year. So like, man, we were moving. There was a time where I was working with the Young Bucks every weekend. There was times where I was working with the Wolves every weekend. Like, we were really catching some miles and doing some shows. It came around the time where the indies weren't doing anything for me anymore. If you remember, up until recently, you know, earlier this year, there was still only the WWE.
Yeah.
Now there's 7 different places to work for a variety of reasons, and that's awesome. But the WWE wasn't banging on my door, and I wasn't banging on theirs. So really, what am I getting out of this? Running around doing the indies every weekend, it just really wasn't doing it for me. And at this time, coincidentally, I came in to start doing sports talk radio producing for the largest radio station here in Philadelphia, Sports Radio 94 WIP. So there was more of a, what's the word I'm looking for, a concentration on that as opposed to running out and doing indies every weekend. I really needed to nail this down.
Right, that wasn't something that you could be doing as like a hobby.
No, this was the next step after wrestling. And if this over here came around again, sure, that'd be cool.
So let's talk a little bit about today, what you're doing today, and then after that we'll talk about, you know, potential future things. But what are you doing right now? I know you have the Smarks and Stripes podcast. Yep. So just fill everybody in on what you're up to now, what your involvement is in professional wrestling today, if any, and, you know, other than the podcast. And
my involvement in professional wrestling today is very limited. I still keep my finger on the pulse, still keep an eye on what people are doing. I watch some of the shows if I can. Social media obviously is a great tool to keep up with what's going on in the business. You learn very quickly what people like and what people don't like just simply by looking at Twitter.
Yeah.
But my involvement's very limited. Right now, I am a sports talk radio producer for WIP. As you said, we do the Smarks and Strips podcast. It's pretty cool. The dynamic of the Smarks and Strips podcast is I'm obviously the Stripes versus the Smarks. I have 2 co-hosts. They're wrestling fans. I'm the industry insider. And we meet in the middle. You know, believe the fans think they know better than the people in the business?
I can't. That doesn't seem right to me, Kevin.
It's
It doesn't.
crazy. It's insane. And, most times on the podcast, they learn pretty quickly.
Right.
They don't know better than me. But we have a lot of fun. We have a lot of guests. Like I said earlier, we had Cody and Brandy on the podcast last week. We have Ken Anderson coming up this week. It's on iTunes, radio.com, all the major platforms. We've had Tom Phillips on. We've had Baron Corbin, Bailey Mark Henry. So go back and listen to some of them. We have a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, definitely make sure that you listen to the podcast. It is entertaining. The future. What would it take for you to put the stripes back on? Obviously, we've got AEW now. There are so many NWA. There MLW just getting ready to have their first pay-per-view. There's so much going on. And then, of course, there is the WWE that has Raw, that has Smackdown, that has NXT now on USA. There's a lot out there. You are somebody with vast knowledge in that department. Obviously, any of those companies could utilize somebody with your skill and with your knowledge. So have you thought about that? Are you waiting to hear from someone? Are you thinking, hey, maybe I'll reach out? Is it just kind of a timing right thing?
Yeah, I think the time would have to be right. Look, man, there's a lot going on right now, and it's a really cool time. I wasn't in the business during the Attitude Era. Obviously, I was a kid during the Attitude Era. I was a fan during the Attitude Era. I think we're on the cusp, if we're not already in one. I think we're on the cusp of a boom in the business, and sitting on the sidelines for a boom in the business that I gave so much of my life for and so much of my adult life for. Sitting on the sidelines isn't exactly a lot of fun. But I don't know. I think it would have to work out. It would have to be right for everybody, whether that is NWA, whether that is AEW, whether it's MLW, Impact, whatever it is. It has to make sense for both sides. I'm not completely against it. It's certainly something that I would explore and have conversations with, and with whoever, and all that fun stuff. Not necessarily looking to do a full-time road schedule. And let's be honest, there's only one company that does a full-time road schedule right now. And like we said earlier, they're not banging my door down. I'm certainly not, banging on theirs. Not to say I wouldn't do it. It's just something that I'm not necessarily interested in. But the future is, it's a cool thing about the future, man. You never know. You never know what's going to happen. It's,
and I mean the same can be said for the wrestling business in general. And would you ever? So like for me, we talked about when I wanted to be a wrestler, just like you. We just wanted to be wrestlers, and it took me a good decade to wrap my head around the fact that maybe I could be a part of this business again, not as a wrestler. And now, I have the show on Fight and everything I've been able to do with AEW and Fight, and other companies as well. I love what I'm doing, and it's something that I never thought I'd be able to do. Are you open? Obviously, your regular job, you're not refereeing.
Right.
You have another set of skills outside of that. Have you ever entertained the idea of maybe getting back into the business, doing something else?
Sure. I think I have a lot to offer in that area. Obviously I did TV for wrestling, and know how to work in IFB and be produced through all that stuff, and now I have the radio experience and all that stuff. Yeah, I'm definitely open to that. But we'll see. I'm ridiculously, how do I say this? Ridiculously organized, and kind of have a little bit of ADD and stuff like that. So I'm very good with paperwork and staying busy, and just an office type person. So behind the scenes jobs and stuff like that, I'd be able to do that. I'd be happy doing that. I still have a mind for wrestling. Still have a mind for the business. I don't think any company would ever hire me as a producer, but I would certainly be able to contribute in that way. There's the cool thing about me, and I'm saying this about me, the cool thing about me, but the cool thing about me is I'm multifaceted. I'm not just wrestling tunnel vision. I have certain other things that can contribute to whatever show.
To an overall production.
To an overall product.
Right. Well, is there one thing in your experience that you had to date in professional wrestling that stands out to you as maybe your favorite moment, your favorite thing that you got to be a part of anything that stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to answer. The final deletion was probably the career highlight. Close second was the first time I did Monday Night Raw in Philadelphia, obviously. Center ice of the Flyers, worldwide television, family there, the whole deal. And weirdly, the third one, and I shouldn't say this weirdly because I did it quite often, but like anytime I got to work with Cena, like anytime you worked with John, it was just a different feeling. Like it felt like you were even though you were in the ring, he was the star. But it felt like you were the star too. Like he was just working with him.
Everything happening under those lights
was just a completely different level anytime you worked with Cena. So I'd probably say those three were certainly things that I look back on.
All right. Well, I look forward to when and if you have any more of those things, then you'll have to come back and
you never know.
And talk to us
but
again.
We'll chat again.
Awesome.
You got it.
Thanks for being here, Kevin.
Appreciate it.
All right, Kevin Keenan, everybody.